I'm going to say something potentially dangerous on the internet that may destroy my standing with the entire internet community. And it's not political. I don't do political here when I can avoid it. However, this may be the most controversial statement I've ever made, but I ask you to hear me out first before you judge me, because I have a good reason why. Okay? Here it goes. I do not consider myself an anime fan. I said hear me out! Look, I grew up during the first big Japanimation boom in the 1980s, but I didn't watch most of it because the distributors weren't for the mature stuff. Or rather, the gore and boob fests that claimed to be mature, but maybe more immature than Hamtaro in terms of story quality. There were a few things I saw, and if we lived in the same city we did our weekly grocery shopping in, I would have rented that Captain Choo video at least once. But most of my exposure to the animation from Japan was on TV. This may tick off the purists, but I grew up with Voltron, not Beast King Go Lion. My friend still refuses to refer to Mazinger Z as anything other than Tranzor Z, even when I'm wearing the shirt. I used to sneak downstairs at 6 in the morning on Saturdays to watch Battle of the Planets. And one show I really enjoyed watching was Robotech. This was my childhood, and while I find the original Japanese versions interesting, these are the versions I'm nostalgic about. I don't look at anime, Japanimation, or whatever you want to call it as some separate genre that belongs on this shelf apart from animated works from other countries. That's not how I was exposed to them. I watched them right alongside He-Man, Transformers, GoBots, Super Friends, and everything else I grew up with. I didn't see the difference between Voltron and Mighty Orbots, except that the robots were, for lack of a better term, alive and the lions weren't, at least until Voltron the Third Dimension, which was a US-produced series. Heck, I don't even care if they're called cartoons, because I don't see the same stigma as so many other people do. And I used to argue with my grandfather that not every cartoon was the Mickey Mouses. I was like 5 and he was from Portugal. It was the only cartoon he really knew, and I was a toon junkie even back then. So understand, I don't look at Robotech and see some bastardization. I see Carl Macek taking 3 unaligned shows and creating a unique mythos surrounding a fantastic technology and the strange energy that powers it. I'll get into that show in more detail another day, but I wanted to be clear on the perspective I'm coming from, and why I picked up a movie showing what was in my mind was the SDF-1 and finding a reference to Macross City. In actuality, it was Macross in Clash of the Bionoids. I wouldn't even hear of Do You Remember Love, the movie's actual name, until decades later. I knew Robotech was made of 3 different shows, and would later learn that Harmony Gold originally just planned to do a westernized dub of Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, but there weren't enough episodes for a full American release, and presumably too many for one weekend series. So they grabbed Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross and Genesis Clamor Mospedia to form a new mythology, the Odyssey of Robotech. Why Super Dimension Century Orgus wasn't used, I couldn't tell you, but at least the only connection between the 3 Super Dimension series is Super Dimensions in the title. Meanwhile, Macross has gone on to be a huge franchise on its own, with numerous spin-offs and sequels to its name. In 1984, the movie Do You Remember Love hit theaters, retelling of the events of the original Macross series, and about as accurate to the source material as Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor was to history. Come to think of it, here the movie is considered part of Macross canon as an in-universe movie telling the events of the first meeting with the Zentradi, so I'm not really that far off, am I? Macek had wanted to do the dub as their Robotech movie, but due to what Wikipedia only referred to as political reasons, Harmony Gold couldn't pull it off. An international dub was produced called The Super Fortress Macross, and released by Celebrity Home Video under the name Macross in Clash of the Bionoids, as part of their Just for Kids lineup. An odd choice, but even today, convincing people that cartoons are not kid stuff alone, without being subversive comedies like South Park, is hard to do. Now, I haven't seen Do You Remember Love, and I only know about some of the changes to it and the Toho dub before being further edited by Celebrity. But the version I grew up with is Clash of the Bionoids, so that's the version I'm going with. If that offends the anime purists out there, you're welcome to do your own review or go over the changes I have in the comment. Also, the circles of the internet I seem to travel in appear to hate everything I grew up with anyway, so you'll have to forgive my lack of concern. But this is what I grew up with, and this is what I'm reviewing. Not based on any of the original incarnations, but solely on this particular dub and what I see. Is this something that stands out on its own like Robotech, or are the flaws obvious even to a dumb American? Well, it's a dub from the 1980s by people whose native language is not what they're dubbing into, so we've got problems already. I can acknowledge my childhood wasn't perfect. If you can acknowledge it wasn't a blight on media, and based on what I've seen from other reviewers, that's not likely. The movie opens with a pretty cool establishing shot of the external and internal areas of the Macross. That's the SDF-1 for you Robotech fans. The bridge seems to have a lot more going on than the Fortress Bridge in the series, but there also seems to be a larger population in the ship. As to why they're out here with a full city, we get some mention of a tragedy, and that's all you get. It's not the only victim of the truncation. I think we're supposed to infer that the Zeltrandi were behind it, but it's not really stated. Besides, we don't have time for that. We have to launch our spacefaring planes without the usual hangar launch, because that doesn't take nearly enough time. Are they actually launching 2 at a time? Half your squadron would be space debris by the time the other half got bored waiting for their turn. Back in Oversized City, Lin Min-mei begins her concert. Unlike the series, we don't see her rise to singing idol status. She's already a popular singer with at least one album already out there. And I have to say this at the outset. The dubbing in this movie is terrible. I'll be making fun of it quite often. But Min-mei's voice here is better than the Robotech show. They left her original singing voice in, so she tends to sing in Japanese, which is why I'm betting Celebrity edited her musical scenes down so much. I don't agree with that, as she has a great singing voice, and her dub VA portrays a more interesting character than Reba West Min-mei, even making her sound more like a Chinese woman, speaking proper English as a second language. I have nothing against West's acting skills, mind you. She did a great job with other roles in the show, but a singer she is not.
Stage lights flashing, the feeling smashing, my heart and soul belong to you. And I'm here now singing, all bells are ringing, my dream has finally come true. I love you, you love me, だけど彼ったら私より自分の飛行機にお熱なの South by love, South by love, remember 燃える瞳闇を救う South by love, South by love.
So, if anything else, Min-mei is better here. But this time her concert is interrupted by the attack we haven't seen yet. Here we meet Skull Squadron and their commander, Roy Fokker. I'm using the Japanese pronunciations here instead of the Robotech, but otherwise he's the only other character to keep a name between versions, as he and Min-mei just have some spelling changes, really. Roy gets his name from the airplane, and my apologies to those using captions who can't follow along. I will stick with the Robotech pronunciation Fokker, if only because that's what my mouth is used to. Plus because of what Fokker sounds like, since we can't have nice things on the internet and I have a PG rating to maintain. We meet our main character, Hikaru Totally Not Rick Hunter Ichijo, who's already a pilot in the UN Spacey. Ever wonder what those words on the SDF-1 meant? He's joined by his 2 pals, Max and Hayo Kazikaze. Don't get attached to Hayo if you liked him or Ben Dixon. In this version he does almost nothing, and I needed a wiki to tell me when he died in the movie. Maximilian Genius, aka Max Sterling, gets slightly more to do. However, this was a decoy maneuver, as the unnamed, is the Zentradi. Zentradi actually have a second group attacking the Macross from behind, with the ship's main defenders having been drawn away. And here we get to see what kind of man Hikaru really is when talking to Superior Officer Misa Hayase, the future Lisa Hayes.
Delta to Skull 11. Intercept that ship. You must do this immediately.
Who's talking? I saved you before, remember?
Please, no more answering back. Just get on with your job.
I'll deal with them. I'm not listening to a woman. Go!
The term toxic masculinity, I feel, is overused and misused. Not so much in Hikaru's case. So let him let the ship's defense team do their job. He decides he's the only one who can stop the enemy, and follows a group of Zentradi into the ship, and right near where Min-mei and her manager brother are seeking shelter, just as the ship is transforming into its still not as big as Unicron, but pretty darn impressive robotic mode to fire the big guns.
What? A man and a woman? What's that? A man and a woman. It must be proto-culture.
Congratulations, you passed basic biology. Now, actually, there's a good reason for a shock, but with that dub, he kind of sounds like a child. Or a robot. Or a child robot. He tries to grab Minmay, but Hikaru shows up and they fight, the gravity generator in the area damaged. Hikaru manages to save Minmay, but crashes behind the closing wall, ending up in the bowels of the ship. Notice how the mecha transformation seems so mundane the way they treat them? I don't know what was cut from the start of the movie, and I don't care that we already know what's going to happen. This is a different continuity, and when Hikaru/Rick first transforms as fighter, and when the Fortress first transforms in the show, it's treated as amazing for the audience. Here, the first time we see them, it's pretty much what we'd expect nowadays, when the concept of transforming mechas is impressive. But this comes from 1984, when transforming vehicles were still relatively new and cool, like we get when the big cannon first fires and wipes out the enemy. Meanwhile, in the ship, we learn that this is Hikaru and Minmay's first meeting, and the pilot is a huge fanboy, even asking for an autograph instead of, oh, I don't know, trying to find out where they are and how to get out. Just a thought. Okay, he knows they're in the engine room, which just raises a bunch more questions when the crew can't find them, like, why is there no door to the engine, as well as why the engines are so close to the city since they don't establish anything about how they got out here like the show did. Minmay is actually okay with this, as it means she gets a break from all the rehearsing instead of screaming in panic and crying about never finding love. Whatever other faults this movie has, Bionoids Minmay is still a better character. The ship takes off and the gravity drops. Hikaru has to teach Minmay how to float around in 0G, and the reflectors on Hikaru's shirt start to glow, which scares the daylights out of him until Minmay's dress does the same. He treats this as some big deal, but it's never explained or brought up again, so pointless moment when 0G flying around should have been enough. It's a good thing some food came in with them, because 3 days passed with no way to find them. Misa assumes he deserted because he isn't cut out for being a soldier, and Claudia, who kept her first name but not her last between versions, chides her for being too critical and saying that's why she's alone. This causes Misa to think back to her lost love, who will never be brought up in this version of the story ever again, so why leave this in? Meanwhile, Minmay and Hikaru bond in their situation, and that's another thing this movie did better than the series, making Minmay and Hikaru's romance flow better. That's probably because they actually have one, as Minmay spends the majority of the series treating him as a friend, in the last few episodes suddenly falling in love with him. At least here we actually see a relationship forming that will make the love triangle work better. Of course, we also get Hikaru's dumbest moment, and he hasn't come off as the brightest guy to begin with this far. However, Hikaru should be smart enough to know that an on-screen kiss doesn't mean she's actually in love with the guy she's kissing, which she demonstrates by acting a scene out with him complete with kiss. That means the only time we see Hikaru and Minmay kiss, she didn't actually mean it, and yet still better than the series. Of course, now is when they finally open that door for reasons, and somehow the paparazzi is right there to take shots of a floating Minmay kissing some pilot. How do they know to be there? They're the paparazzi. It's a gift. Or a curse if you're a celebrity, but I digress. I should note that her biggest song is My Boyfriend is a Pilot, so guess what TMZ's headline was? Misa decides not to throw the book at Hikaru for disobeying orders because he saved Minmay, but he's still a jerk to her. We're supposed to be rooting for these two, right? Because of the show? Really, he's getting the short end of this movie. Of course, Roy may be the only one to get it worse. Hikaru meets Roy at the bar where Claudia and Misa are also with him, and despite every time they have met outside of this mysterious rescue having been confrontational, Roy and Claudia insist he joins them. This surprisingly does not end badly. Not only because of the previous encounters between these two, but because Roy, who, by the way, is drunk, because, kids movie, tells Misa to relax and demonstrates to Hikaru how to treat a woman by sexually assaulting Claudia right there. I hope they're dating in this continuity as well. The fact she hasn't punched him where the moon don't shine makes no sense. I'd say Hikaru needs some advice as he runs off to his date with Minmay, but you'd be better off getting romance advice from Shaggy. I'm not sure if I mean the singer or the guy from Scooby-Doo. We get a montage of Hikaru and Minmay, which is cute and sweet, even the part where he tries to talk her into going to a motel. I guess he's been listening to Roy after all, but I have to ask, why is there a motel aboard the ship? Where are you expecting tourists from in a space battle fortress in deep space? Yeah, I've heard of love motels, but remember, this was left in the kid-friendly edit, and the joke went over my head back then. I'd rather have heard more Minmay singing. To show off, Hikaru takes Minmay into space in a training fighter to wow and amaze her, only for Misa and her brother manager to show up and yell at them both for it. Apparently the thing doesn't have a long-range radio or something. Now I have to ask how he was able to launch that thing without permission. The enemy commander has been ordered to snag some micro-humans as a sample of that proto-culture the other soldier was on about. But the female army, the Meltrandi, are headed there as well. This has Commander Vertwey, I'm just going to call him Bretai, and his right-hand man Exodal instead of Exeter, so that one I can actually do. Anyway, it has them worried, and why does Exodal have such a huge brain? Everyone else is pretty close to their show model, but now Exodol can't find a good hat.
Fortify our line of defenses. The women must not penetrate. Yes, sir.
Oh, so much for biology lessons. I know, not my usual brand of humor, but it's one of those times even I couldn't avoid it. Luckily, Roy comes to the rescue. Unluckily, he's drunk again.
So what? You can still fight when you're drunk?
Hikaru's mentor, ladies and gentlemen, explains a lot. Our quintet is taken prisoner, of course, aboard the flagship of Supreme Commander Gog Bottle Zur. Yeah, forgive me for the pronunciations, it's hard to hear sometimes. They're put through a series of questions about why they're so small, why they don't fight, and what's a baby. Then we get to the topic of kissing. Roy offers to demonstrate on Minmay, and oddly it's her brother that pushes him off, and not her date. And it's also her brother who insists he should be the one to kiss her. In case you thought Minmay's cousin in Robotech hitting on her wasn't creepy enough. And that was before the anime trend of little sisters wanting to hook up with their brother. Seriously, that's a recent harem trope, and it's as sick as you think. At any rate, it's the kiss itself and not the incest that freaks them out so bad. Exodol's brain looks like it's about to explode. Or maybe they're into that because the limbs are separated from the others. They're found by a Meltrandy infiltration team, and how they were able to get in there in an armed battlesuit is anyone's guess. That's rather weak security for a group of warmongers. Hikaru, Misa, and Roy manage to escape back to their fighters, but two soldiers find them. Roy tells Hikaru to kiss Misa, which has the same response on the soldiers, but she slaps him, which would be the reaction the enemy would expect from a man and a woman, and you'd think would undo any advantage that would give them. So the only forced kiss in this movie that earns a face slap is the one that least deserves it. This seems like a mistake. One of the enemy manages to jump on Roy's Bionoid, killing him, after a final request from Hikaru to tell Claudia goodbye.
That's what he wanted.
You're too heartless.
I would comment on that terrible delivery before Hikaru notices she's sad, but what does Misa mean that's what he wanted? He wasn't blocking the enemy so they could escape. The dude just dropped from the ceiling and surprised him. Is she saying he's been suicidal all this time? Would explain forcing yourself on your girlfriend for witnesses, I guess. Hikaru follows Minmay via a tracking device she's carrying, which just raises a whole lot more questions about the brother manager, who isn't named in the movie, by the way. However, they're blown out of the ship just as it goes to warp, sending them to a desolate planet, which turns out to be Earth. So this became a post-apocalyptic movie in a hurry. Okay, so we know the dub itself is not very good, but that's nothing new for the time. Even when an English-speaking native group was used in the 1980s, the dubbing process had only slightly improved from the days of Speed Racer. And there are plenty of fans of Japanese animation who insist that every show must smash the Japanese completely. Many even insist that it should just be subtitled. And if that's the way you prefer it, I don't have a problem with that. Fun fact, that same debate goes on in Japan with American shows. What I do have a problem with is a cry of rage when anime is toned down for TV and a form more appealing to a Western culture, typically American. If that had been the battle cry this whole time, you wouldn't have anime as big as it is in the States today. Japanese animation first entered the US with shows like Astro Boy, Gigantor, and Speed Racer. However, unlike today, where we have plenty of choices for shows outside of the US and English-speaking countries in general, we didn't have the internet and we're just barely over having gone to war with Japan. This was also a time when American animation studios were doing pretty well and networks weren't so cheap, out of greed, necessity, or a bit of both. We didn't have a huge understanding of Japanese culture, which is tough when you're viewing a show steeped in it, just as much as our shows are of American culture of the time. Even today, the only way to really understand Japanese culture is to live in Japan for a certain amount of time. No, watching Azumanga Daioh is not a good way to understand Japanese culture any more than watching Uncle Grandpa is to understand American culture. So when these shows were translated for US TV, it helped people be exposed to a new experience. It was a toned-down experience, but as shows from Japan started catching on around the same time as the rise of the home video market, video distributors were given a whole new audience to sell to. It took time, but even the anime on TV today reaches a new audience who, upon learning of its roots, may well look into anime and the Japanese treatment of animation. If anime hadn't reached the mainstream culture, the only way you'd find out about it would be to be in a Japanese-speaking area. The mainstream was your exposure to Japanese animation, at least for most of you out there, so at least give it credit for that. I picked up this movie because I enjoyed Robotech. it was the first anime I bought. Whether it was worth buying, well, let's get back to the review and find out. Back with the Zentradi, Minmay starts singing to help her remain calm, and this surprises Britai, who knows about protoculture, a culture without fighting that's deemed forbidden by their creators. Exodal asks if that quote-unquote horrible noise is protoculture, showing that he's a music critic, but not Britai explains it's a song. This is all new to them, but he has a relic from the protoculture. Hikaru and Misa spend the next months trying to find some signs of life or a way to contact the Macross, getting more and more frustrated as they travel. In the meantime, they don't seem to be running out of jet fuel. Hikaru tries to comfort Misa by offering an ugly fish, but don't worry, the radioactivity has been completely neutralized. How? No, seriously, Hiroshima and Nagasaki took years to recover from their bombings, and it's been maybe a year or two since the unspecified tragedy. How is the radioactivity neutralized from the dead fish? Hey, if they hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't be asking, folks. They raised the question. During their travels, they come upon a strange tower with high-tech equipment. Misa attempts to contact the Macross and manages to contact space immigrants who assume they're clones and just cut them off. Jerks.
What was the last thing they said?
They're using their last reserve to lift the city.
Really? All I heard was,
We will cease communication. Cease communication. Cease communication. Cease communication.
stop ceasing and cease already. Jeez. However, they do lift the city. I guess they get their technology from planet Eris. Misa also somehow knows about protoculture, from the long-dead somebodies who created clones that became the male Zentradi and female Maltrandi, until the two went to war. I put a joke here, but I try to keep this apolitical and not bound by current events. That keeps the review timeless and enjoyable by everybody. I'm a uniter, not a divider. The creator realized he messed up and came to Earth to start again, but making our ancestors spacemen was popular in Japanese sci-fi at the time. Misa finds a tablet similar to Not Brittai's, but the only thing she can make out is, do you remember? She tries to set up house in this new city, population 2, but the attempt at normality actually makes her fall apart. As Hikaru consoles her while he's convinced Minmay is dead, the two share a tender moment. The first non-forced kiss by the couple, or one slapped the other during the last forced kiss. Their relationship is always weird, isn't it? Apparently it was a very tender moment concerning the next scene. Was this place a motel? Well, at least they got dressed up before the Macross showed up. Captain Global, not Gloval, actually makes an appearance in this movie, which leads to another problem I have. So much of the supporting cast are barely to never in this. We don't connect with Max, not Ben Dixon dies without any of the emotion we got seeing him killed in the show. The Bridge Girls, the source of comic relief on this show, especially Sammy, make a brief cameo and that's it. All these characters who made a huge impact just aren't there. How much of this is blamed on the edit, I don't know, but considering how much I grew to care about these characters, their absence is notable and disappointing. I'm not sure they would work in a movie since you only have so much time to devote to so many characters, but that's the problem with these truncated renditions. And this is less a summary and more a reimagining of the Macross series. It almost would have been better off leaving them out entirely, even Max, whose story arc is non-existent here. After delivering the sad news to Claudia, assuring her Roy died a hero and not sucker punched by ceiling cat, Hikaru and Misa return to the city and find a memorial to Minmay. They don't have long to relax when the Maltrandi come in to find their own pieces of culture. Collectors, am I right? Kazi is killed right off. I told you not to get too attached to him. Max gets into a serious fight with one of the Maltrandi, matching her move for move. This is most likely Melia, whom Robotech fans know as Miria. Now, I tried to just view this on its own and compare just Robotech, the reason I bought the movie as a kid in the first place. However, I did learn a few differences. According to the Macross wiki, there's a fan wiki for almost everything, the two of them quickly fall in love rather than the long, weird courtship their show counterparts had and fight together. Max even going into giant form in reverse of the show. This couple represented a turning point in the war, further advanced by them having a child, a rather new experience for the clone woman. But in this edit, looks like he killed her. Again, the kid's edit. If I hadn't learned of the change, I would have blamed Toho, but instead I blamed Celebrity for this one, unless this also happened in the Super Fortress Macross edit. However, the Maltrandi do manage to destroy the Macross's main guns until a song is broadcast, taking away the fighting spirit of the anime, maybe just confusing everyone about how repetitive it is. The broadcast comes from Not Brittai's ship, and the Maltrandi take off, Zentradi calling for a truce. Global gives a speech telling everyone about the truce and the song, which came from the tablet, and getting everyone up to speed what they've learned about the ties between the Zentradi, Maltrandi, and humans. Exodal really isn't on board with all this, but he's going along with it. Minmay appears next, telling how they found the music to the song, but they need to find the words in order to create everlasting peace. And since the wild stallions aren't around, it's up to them. Hikaru and Misa are also honored for all the history they've uncovered in the Risen City, leading to a rather awkward reunion between Hikaru and Minmay. Later, Minmay finally deciphers the words on the tablet she found in the city and realizes they match up with the music from the Zentradi tablet. I guess the name of the place is Coincidence City. Seriously, what are the odds? She goes to tell Hikaru, but Minmay is there thinking they can resume their romance. When she realizes that's not going to go as planned, she runs out crying. Misa tells Hikaru to chase the woman he loves, but that woman is Misa. Their happy moment is cut short when the Meltrandi return in force. Way to kill the mood, girls. Actually, as you see, I'm rather confused by who's shooting who. Without the completed song, Not Braytai doesn't think they can beat the women and prepares to destroy the Macross. Apparently he doesn't understand how a truce works. You don't destroy the people you're trying to make friends with. Dead people make the worst songwriters. Of course, given some of the songs that have been put out over the years, that's not saying a lot. As the battle is joined, Hikaru rushes after Minmay to get her to sing the song. In a moment of symbolism, some of the places he and Minmay went to on their date get shot up as laser blasts go through the ship and into the city. Eventually, Hikaru finds her, and believe it or not, a girl who just learned the man she's been thinking about for months while in captivity found someone else has made her a bit hysterical.
Why should I? Why should I sing the song another woman has found?
Minmay apparently doesn't care for songwriters.
You can't win a war by singing a song. It's stupid.
And yet, that's one of the things this franchise is built on. That and love triangles, plus fighting with spaceplane robots, of course. As Bottle Zur is ready to sacrifice his own people to bring the Meltrandi and Macross down, Minmay tries to convince Hikaru to just stay with her since they're all going to die. But Hikaru isn't budging. Eventually, Minmay realizes people are dying out there and agrees to sing the song. Without any rehearsal, she begins her concert. Then again, the words Misa recited were the same ones Minmay was singing in her cell, so either it's more coincidence or the dubbers goofed. And in a franchise where Taylor Swift could save the world, it shouldn't be a surprise that a pop song gives the Zentradi the strength to join the humans and go after Bottle Zur? Wait. I thought they were fighting the women. Do I need a program to keep track of who's fighting whom? Hikaru manages to break into the flagship and gives Bottle Zur a face full of laser. The ship explodes as Minmay and Misa settle their differences. Wait, shouldn't they be sad Hikaru blew up? Well, this is another moment from the original edit that I'm aware of. Believe it or not, Hikaru survives this and radios that he's fine, which is why they're celebrating. That's missing here. That's a big goof. As the Zentradi talk about defeating the rest of the baddies with the power of a popular song, as Misa calls it, the movie ends with Minmay psyching up for her next concert, although Celebrity decided not to show us that performance either. So that was Clash of the Bionoids. Again, ignoring the original version and the uncut dub because they aren't what I grew up with. Quite honestly, it's still kind of a mixed bag. There are a few things that I'm sure are the fault of Do You Remember Love? The supporting cast is virtually non-existent due to the runtime. The plot idea that Earthlings were created by space aliens, which again was popular in Japanese sci-fi at the time, and for all I know comes from the original Super Dimension Fortress Macross, has never worked for me, even when ignoring my religious beliefs, and some of the redesigns for the Zentradi really don't work for me. Even if the Meltrandi models are okay, and the human redesigns are just fine. Then you have old Drunken Roy and Nitwit Hikaru. The latter might be the fault of the dub, but the former is definitely the movie's fault. Apparently he can be worse than a hopeless flirt who still only has eyes for Claudia. And yet there's things I know the dub is responsible for, like the acting and the dialogue. Then Celebrity comes along and, while I can often defend certain edits from when anime was altered for a Western audience, and some changes were probably made because they were building off the success of Robotech, which they considered a kid's show, dropping the music is not one of them. I get wanting to tone the violence down. The show used to be the same way until Harmony Gold recently shoved them back in for their new versions. The singing, which is a big part of the franchise, I don't quite agree with taking out. They also didn't have space to flesh out Max and Milla's romance, so they should have not bothered. But Celebrity's edit made it look like she's dying, which ruins one of the great romances of the series and a rather important one in the show. That being said, there are also things done right. Minmay's voice actress and singing voice are better than Robotech's. Her relationship with Hikaru works better here than Hikaru/Rick pining over her for years, only for her to finally want to be with him when his heart is being drawn towards Misa/Lisa. She's less of a childish persona here, and they actually have a romantic relationship until the Zentradi blocker. We also lose the incest subplot with Minmay's cousin, her brother manager, instead only kissing her, satisfied as Zentradi, all it still should have been Hikaru. Speaking of Misa, her character arc and her growing relationship to Hikaru was just fine in the show, and is one of the few things that survive intact in the condensing. Zentradi models aside, the art and animation benefit from the movie budget, and do look really good, even if sometimes the space battles get a bit too close. Final thoughts. I'm willing to bet that Do You Remember Love doesn't have all the problems, or Super Fortress Macross benefits from not cutting things down for kids. Heck, if Minmei's voice actress, Mari Ijimi, and I may be pronouncing that wrong, is providing the voice and singing here, she's got a better voice and as good as the music can be in Robotech Minmei's handful of songs. They're not the best, except for We Can Win. But while I can appreciate the original, I like the tone changes Macek made for Macross Saga with music and performance. I like how he strung 3 unrelated series to create a unique experience. And more importantly, it's what I grew up with, which means it ultimately means more to me than Macross ever will. I tried watching a few episodes from the Robotech Perfect Collection. It's a set of tapes with 2 episodes of Robotech and 2 episodes for Japanese counterparts. They did for all 3 wars. The Macross versions just didn't work as well, at least for me, and I very much enjoyed Southern Cross and Mospedia. The only other Macross productions that I've seen from the franchise is Macross 2, which was pretty good, and Macross Plus, which didn't excite me nearly as much as it does fans. They're good, but Robotech is both good and presses my nostalgia button the right way. On my website, for those of you coming in from YouTube, I'm reviewing this in coordination with my weekly reviews of the Robotech comics by various publishers over the years, and I try to form a proper timeline with them. In time, I will be returning to this series to look at 3 Robotech movies that we ended up with. One that was a failed series, one that shouldn't have been made in the first place, and one that was hoped to start a series of movies, all trying to continue the odyssey of Robotech. I will get into those in due time, barring incidents. But whatever version you prefer, go ahead. Find the version you love best and enjoy it. It's your taste and your entertainment. Robotech works best for me, and someday I may try to see these other versions, but I have a soft spot for Clash of the Bionoids. Whatever inspires you the most, that's where your heart goes. And they did make a better Minmei.